So welcome back. We're just going to go into our second half here and do a little bit of a continuation of the last discussion and dive into a little bit of kind of the aspects of managing a research community, managing a panel. We've already met Mike. We've already met Sean. We've got a new guest, Ben Kelsey from CDP Cambridge Design Partnership. And Ben has a really interesting role there. He's kind of the lead researcher at a broader product development. And so a lot of his work is around figuring out, how do we test concepts? How do we come up with the right new products? And he's been using communities in a really interesting way to kind of run in-home product testing, diary studies, things like that. So it's going to be great to have him on the panel. We're going to make this interactive, so please, come with questions, and we can kind of dive into this. And I'll let Mike kick us off with some questions here.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to actually just pass it straight over to Ben. I mean, we heard about the kind of the Zoopla community. Tell us a bit about Cambridge Design Partnership. First of all, what it is and what it does, and then tell us about how you've built and worked with communities.
So very broadly, we're a product design firm, and that means that I spend my days working with the best part of 250 engineers. So I'm one of the few researchers in the company. My role primarily is to basically understand the user or the individual that's using it. We come up with lots of very clever, lots of very creative stuff. But if it's too clever and too creative, no one knows how to use it. It doesn't always benefit everyone. So my job basically is to ground that on the evidence of A, what people need, or then on all the other side of it, when we come to the product, what is it and how do we make it as usable as possible so it has the best chance of doing what it says on the tin and making a difference to their lives. So broadly, panels are really good for us, and everything we do is kind of bespoke and ad hoc. So sometimes we're setting up the panels, other times we're working with clients' existing panels. But it's a really good way of onboarding the clients and getting everyone to see the needs firsthand so that they can think about the solutions and the ways that they can dial into it. And specifically working with Aseem and QuestionPro, I think very early on in your sort of time with QuestionPro, there was a call with Aseem and I had a challenge which basically I couldn't for the life of me work out a solution for. One of my directors had a conversation and promised something and came over to me, said, Ben, I've got a research project for you. And I was like, great, what is it? And at the end of the conversation, I was like, oh no. I don't think we can do this. But at sort of the crux, it was testing a product with 280 people across 4 different countries within the time span of about 4 weeks. So I was like, this is going to need some thought. So initially, my thought, to your point previously, was that we need the scale. We might not get the empathy, but we need to go to some sort of survey, send it out worldwide. But collating all that information was a nightmare. People move houses, people move addresses. So honestly, I got a call from Aseem, who introduced himself, and I was like, oh, well, we'll see how you get on with this one. And then the suggestion was to use a panel, and actually it worked really well because we had some central board to onboard people. If they moved address or if they needed to receive the product, they could let us know, but it also allowed us to set tasks so we could basically gradually onboard them. And the key thing was the client had made a key change, this prototype device, and they wanted to understand, could people still use it when this change was in place? And fortunately, the answer was yes, but there were some changes they needed to make ensure everyone could use it. But yeah, the panel worked really well, and it was something that I hadn't thought about at the time, but it allowed us to access an audience and keep them engaged that we wouldn't have otherwise done. And also, this was a group of people that are incredibly difficult to find. So once we had them, we could keep them for further studies. So yeah, it's incredibly valuable. And as a top-down sort of viewpoint of what I do and how we've worked with the panels, that's a brief summary.
That's great, thanks. So you thought you were going to get rid of this guy who was pitching you, but actually he managed to make it work.
Yeah, I always like to set a challenge. It's not always the case that people step up, but I'm very happy it was the case in this instance.
Yeah. A lot of your stuff is physical product feedback, is it? Or is it a lot of the stuff done online?
So, to be honest, it can vary. It can vary from white piece of paper, where it's like the client comes to us and thinks that we'd like to make a change to people's lives or make money in this area, and therefore it's a case of understanding needs and building out from that. That tends to be more empathetic, more qualitative, but right to the other stage where you're testing the size of the market, where you're trying to understand things like that. That ultimately needs scale. It's more quantitative, but it's really flexing the research methods that we have at our disposal to whatever the need may be. And yeah, the example I talked about is a pretty good example of that, where we were able to get an answer to something that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. But to summarize, I've been at Cambridge Design Partnership for 7 years, and in that time I've contributed to the designs of medical robots, ice cream machines, soft drinks bottles, e-cigarettes, and lots of EpiPens. So it's very, very varied what we apply it to. But the key thing is understanding people's needs, and ultimately anyone that uses the product has a need. So the research can be applied to whatever the category is.
Yeah, that's great. What's the culture of research in an organisation, like Cambridge Design? So do you have product designers and engineers who want to get hands-on themselves? Do they want to be asking questions or observing people with prototypes, or do they just push it all to you?
I prefer it if they push it all to me. So sometimes they ask very relevant questions. The way they can be asked at times isn't always helpful. So I prefer to have that conversation with them beforehand and understand it. And they can be as engaged or as impossible, because it's one thing for me to tell them, another thing for them to see it and be able to understand how to design for that need. There's quite a big difference between those two things. But yeah, they can go for the jugular, which is efficient, but maybe not always great, particularly if you're in someone's house running qualitative interviews. So I tend to ask them to ask questions at the end.
Yeah. What about in Zoopla? I mean, it's kind of digital native business. You've got a strong culture of, product managers, designers, they should be doing some of their own research. Do you have to sort of fight the tide, or do you embrace the democratization of that?
We try to embrace it as much as possible. We've had a little bit of like a culture change recently, just resizing, but the designers are still really keen to want to do their own research, and we do encourage that. We've only got 2 user researchers across two very large spaces. So anytime that they come to us with a research question, whether that be from their product manager or themselves, I will get the hang of this microphone by the end of this, I promise. That we do try to embrace it, and we really do try to make sure that they have the guidelines though in place. We don't just let them go free, because otherwise that's when the chaos starts, especially if they're using the panel. But as long as we really do encourage them to go away and do whatever they want to do, as long as we're there to hold their hand a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so Ben, you talked about that panel, that example with the kind of the product placement feedback was a niche audience, was kind of hard to recruit. What other challenges did you find in putting that together, in the building a panel?
We haven't. There was a significant logistical challenge. Talking to people about so we had several stages which we cut through, and I think probably the access rate or the conversion rate from being interested and initially going through our first pass to actually having an address and being able to send the product to them and onboarding them within the survey was within, I think 5% was good. So across 5 markets, it was very challenging. So the research bit, although we had to think a lot about it, the logistics took far more. We had these prototype printers that were being completed, that were at the client site. Aseem was in charge of the users, so their addresses, and then it was making all of those things link up and then making sure they received the printer. So there was a lot in it. So there was a significant logistical challenge. Aside from that, the research ran pretty smoothly, but I don't know if I would have had that viewpoint if the logistics aside from that hadn't been as large as they were.
Yeah, so physical product and shipping stuff is a bit of a challenge. Yeah? Well, I mean, what else have you found? I guess building the Zoopla community. Do you know, I've forgotten the other brand. What was it? What's the other brand? Alto. Sorry, right. I keep meaning.
It's a very strange name. Yeah.
But what else? I guess has been tricky. Unexpected challenges in the process.
I think for us, the unexpected challenge is actually wanting to do more in-person research than we thought. Post-pandemic, it's really easy now to go and do lots of remote research. And we've sort of forgotten actually the sort of uniqueness and the contextual information you miss and you don't pick up on actually just on a virtual call. And now we're struggling with, we want to pivot back slightly to do more in-person research, or go to the estate agent offices, or even come with them to do a house tour or whatever. We're getting a lot of friction of actually that kind of ruins my whole sort of flow of my day. Even if they have done something in the past, it's been quite a few years. So I suppose that's a challenge now. While we're trying to pivot back to doing things in person, we're starting to meet that sort of friction a little bit.
Yeah, what else? Aseem, what else do you see as sort of some of the hurdles or challenges when people are trying to build communities like this?
I think the building phase is the most challenging part, right? You got to go recruit. You're kind of looking at these numbers. It's like you got your options trading, refreshing the page on day one. How many do I have? How many do I have? I think that was exactly the case with the printer study, right? I mean, it literally was 5% that made it through and actually got to the end. But it was a challenging audience, right? I mean, we needed people who had used printers, label printers in the past, who were office managers, who were in these kind of 3-4 distinct geographies. But then year two, it was like way easy, right? I mean, we just sent out, I think I had emails from people in this panel every month from that whole year. When's the next study? When's the next study? How do we participate in the next one, right? And then the next one, we just sent out an email, and it was like, cool, there's, out of the 220 people that we needed, we had 180 right there, ready to go. So I think that kind of shows like, okay, you got to put in the investment time a little bit, but then you've got this asset, right? You've got this community that you can kind of continue to go back to. But the first phase, you've got to commit to it, right? I think that's where people really go wrong, is they look at this and say, let's try it for 3 months. And that's not the mindset you want to go in with, right? It's hey, I'm building an asset for the long term. We're going to invest in a community. We're going to keep them engaged. And yeah, you got to go through the process of recruiting people, getting people activated, thinking about what's going to be in the community. I think Sean had a great tip, right? Like when you get these people in there, make sure they have something to do. Have 3 or 4 activities ready to go so they actually can participate and get going and kind of get into the behavior of using the community itself. So the first phase is challenging, but then I think that's where it all becomes worth it in the end. Yeah,
so it's a good point. You're building an asset that's going to be a long-term payback. When you were pitching your panel for Alto, did you have to kind of build a business case? Did you have to kind of make the case, this is not just a research project, this is a long-term asset?
A bit of 50-50, to be honest. So when I joined Zoopla, they'd already established that maybe some sort of panel could be helpful, but there was a little bit of, it's a long-term goal, I don't know if we can do that. So there was a lot of you will have to trust the process when it came to doing the pitching, and you're not going to see results straight away. And actually, even with the 6 months I mentioned where we've recruited over what we thought, people are still, they expect more. So there's still a lot of management of this is a very niche audience we're doing. It's B2B, so I don't expect thousands of people. So yeah, there's still a lot of management of expectations. But I think, I don't know if you're lucky or unlucky, because of the problems we were facing, it wasn't too tricky to be even a solution is better than doing nothing.
Fair enough. What would you do differently next time? What lessons have you learned up to now in building this?
I think Oki can agree with me that we took a long time to get it from initial contact with QuestionPro to then actually launching it. And that was just to do with just internal priorities. From one moment it's, yes, build it, go, go, go. The next moment is, we can't quite help with that yet because we've got this to worry about. So I think, and this is just a learning lesson for me personally, I think next time really understand what the priorities are for now, as well as the next sort of roadmap. So then I know, is this actually realistic to launch now or later on? Because one minute it's go, go, go. Another minute it's, yeah, we haven't quite got the resources to support you on that. So we're just going to put that on the back burner. I'm like, okay.
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff you need to get lined up, that you maybe didn't anticipate. Is that like, the sort of people or customer data and those types of assets?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned in that first phase about who you actually want to work with. And I think while we eventually got there in the end with knowing who should be in the room, initially it was quite slow of getting those right people in the room. So when it came to the people saying, yes, we need this, so they went with the product managers, the researchers, designers, yes, we need this because we need to do research. It was in that other side of the business that we actually needed that support from, like the marketing, the customer support side of teams. It was a little bit slower to get them on board to help out. But once we did, then things moved really quickly.
Yeah. Ben, somebody comes to you and says, we've got this fantastic idea, we need to get, 1,000 of these complex widgets into the hands of people in 25 countries around the world in this community. What would you apply in terms of lessons from the previous one to make sure you set that up in the right way?
The conversion rate would be the big one. I think that ultimately allows you to set expectations of how many people you need to think you're going to get to how many people you're actually going to get. Other than that, it's not that different to kind of a survey because you're trying to think about the people that you're trying to acquire. The challenge with communities is you've got the level of the tasks that you want them to do, and that level of tasks might rely on a certain engagement that you have to test for and bring in. But then on the other challenge, you might limit the sample. So it would be twofold. It would be what are the tasks that we need them to perform with the product, and how do we make sure we're getting the right people to be able to do that, especially with all the logistics to be able to send them to it. And then once we've aligned with that, it's very much setting expectations on what that conversion may be. Because if it's 5%, you're looking at 20 times as many people as you think you would do. Again, that's a bit dry logistics, but they're probably the top line things that I'd look at based on my experiences so far.
Yeah. Okay. These examples are all sort of B2B, niche audiences. Do you see similar challenges? Do you work with a lot of other B2B communities, the same other customers that you have?
Yeah, we've got a lot of consumer communities as well. And I think, you get much better conversion rates, that's for sure, right? And you're dealing with much higher numbers, right? Some of our communities are 15, 20,000 people. But some of the core kind of activities, you're thinking about the same things, right? How do I keep this 20,000 people engaged? How do we make sure that there's an activity for them every single week? And I think that's where, from a research perspective, you also have to kind of get out of the mindset of every single activity needs to be kind of a core research activity, right? Sometimes you just need to put things out there, right? Ask people how they're feeling this week. What are they thinking about this week? Get the conversation going. And then you start to see magic happening, right? You start to see the community talking with each other in the forums, right? And they're kind of talking about, oh, this interest or that, food, or what's happening with the weather where they are. And you kind of pick up all these things that you may have never thought about before. And then you say, oh, that's an interesting thread. Let me put that into a poll for next week. And then you start to kind of see that momentum grow with the community. But then you also see it internally, right? So you have all these people that are kind of asking you questions, right? Between your stakeholders, your engineering teams, your marketing teams. And before you're like, well, we have to go kind of do a whole research process, a whole study. Now you actually have a place for them to go, right? And say, hey, just ask that as a quick poll. Actually, that's going to help my community because it's going to keep them more engaged at the end of the day. Or yeah, let's send out a quick weekly update that has a few of those questions in there. I can go back to them. And in some cases, you just let your team into the community and say, go post in the forums as though you're a community member, and then they get to see what's happening on their phone in real time and get that discussion going. So I don't think it changes. I think we see communities of all shapes and sizes. We kind of have the B2B ones. We've got the, kind of diary studies, longitudinal studies that you see. You've got big kind of anonymous consumer communities. But then you also have kind of the consumer communities that might be more loyalty-based, right? Hey, these are really, really good fans of the brand, and this now gives them another way to get deeper and almost kind of become a customer advisory board. So you see them being used in lots of different ways.
Yeah, you talked about engagement, important to keep people active and participating. Do you see this? Is it, you've got the kind of purist research angle, but it feels like these are kind of a bit of an intersection between a bit more marketing engagement, kind of brand affinity, as well as research and insight. Is that how a lot of your communities run?
I think it's both, right? I mean, I think the core purpose is still research, right? And so you're maybe doing one kind of heavy research project per month, right? And that's kind of going out on a monthly basis, and that's what's people are getting the big points for. But then weekly, you're kind of just throwing some things out there, right? And seeing what people come back with and engaging them that way. And so it's kind of almost a mixed methods, right? On one side, you've got kind of, okay, here's a hardcore, quant study that we're gonna go out and do a bunch of data processing and analysis and build out a 50-page report on. But then we get these kind of weekly, more, hey, open-ended, what are you guys thinking about today? Let's play around with some different question types and maybe, let you play around with a hotspot and just see what comes out of it. And that may inform your big project next month or the month after. So it kind of gives you, I think, a more agile outlet that a lot of researchers traditionally haven't had, because everything kind of has to be a 4-month commission project. And now you have a way to get out there every week and see what comes back.
Sure. Are you seeing the estate agents, the people who are part of that community, do you think it's having kind of like a relationship effect as well as a research effect with them?
Yeah, I'd like to hope so, especially with those people who are regularly in the forum spaces. They're not, like I said in the presentation, they're not just there to say 1-2-word responses just to get that credit. They genuinely are sharing their experiences and what's going on. Some people are responding like, oh yeah, we're experiencing the same thing. We might be in a different location, but we're completely, in the same sort of boat. And I would like to hope that this is having a knock-on effect with the relationships. So long term, just having it almost as another benefit that you can sort of advertise hey, this is a sort of a free service, but you can join up, talk to other estate agents, maybe earn a little bit of cash on the side. It's not that we actively pitch it, but it's definitely one of those sort of hidden, hey, then we've got this service as well.
And what do you not use in your community for? Are there certain types of things where you think, actually, it's not the right way to do it, or is it covering everything you need to do right now for Alto?
Yeah, it's covering everything we want to do for now. We don't like saying no to to opportunities. I mean, most recently we've actually had the marketing team come in droves asking for support with recruitment for alpha trials of new services, and that's just been another avenue for them to, outside of email campaigns or just going direct to customers. They can actually just advertise. Yes, it's a small audience, but it's a very close relationship sort of audience, and we're having really good success just adding a few more people on top of those trials. So we try not to say no, but there hasn't been a time where we've had to say no either. No one's coming with crazy ideas just yet.
If you were giving advice to somebody coming in and thinking about buying some form of panel engagement, some sort of supplier like QuestionPro, what would you say were the top criteria that you would advise them to look for in terms of a supplier?
For me, and I called it out in the presentation, it really was just what have you got existing and how can this supplier support them, and how can that add to your tool stack to make your findings or whatever you're going to do with it more impactful. And I think that's the question, is what the question is, the knock-on effects. How much impact or return on investment are you going to get from this supplier? And as I called out, QuestionPro really helped with that impact. Just having that extra little tool, especially the surveying side of the panel, has just upped all of our other practices. So that's, for me, is that number one thing.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think for me, it would be engagement and the length of time. Realistically, do you just need some data that you're going to make a decision off, or are you trying to build something? If it's the latter, then I think it's talking to the suppliers to make sure that they're in line with what your long-term ambitions are and what you want to use it for. Realistically, as Aseem touched upon, the key value is you have people there to contact. So you can do your big research study and gain efficiencies in recruitment, but you can also ask questions as and when. So you can ask 3 questions across 3 weeks rather than asking a 10-question survey. And I think that's probably the way you need to look at it. So work out how you want to make the most of it, and then basically make sure that you're working with a supplier that's onboarded with that vision.
Great. Thanks. Other questions? Ben?
Well, I couldn't claim to know this inside out, but I'd imagine, like from my perspective, one of the key things is that it's whether or not you want to take that on yourself. And if you are, then obviously there's less risk and there's more efficiencies, and that you're doing something yourself and then it's going straight out and you get the answer straight back. If something's managed, great, they're probably doing it and tweaking a bit better, they know how to use the stuff, but you're always reliant on someone else. So that would be the key difference, and it's what you want to achieve is the key thing. I think also as well, the usability of these things has gone through the roof, which allows for much more efficiencies than it did way back when.
Yeah, exactly that. I can only add control of whatever you're doing. I mean, I know the agency would work with you, but just not having that extra step is really nice. So it's very, sometimes it's just like today, had a very quick office hour conversation, and then from there we're going to launch something on Monday. There's no need to email, get in touch, hey, we want to do this, oh, they're not working today. Yeah, it's just a lot more control.
Okay, it's a much more kind of agile way of working if you've got direct access to the platform. Yeah. Any other questions? No, but Rob.
I mean, I'm open-minded. Like, I mean, it'd do me out of a job, but but no. In all seriousness, I think if it can help and like save time, then sure. But there's always I think there's always going to be a human final decision on like if it's a content they're making or if it's replying to a comment in a forum automatically. I'd want to make sure that I'm that final like seal of approval. Yep, I see the AI. I see what you're trying to get at here. I approve that. Like, as long as it's got that final human factor in it, then, yeah, I'm open to opportunities like that. As long as it doesn't do me out of a job.
Yeah, I'd be quite keen on it. Like, as long as someone's looking at it and understanding it, and the data is guiding it as you think it should happen, I think it's a good thing. I think also there's an element with communities that they do allow functionality that's 24/7. That's not practical if you want to sleep. So, like, there might be a case that you leave it on in your working day, and then you turn it off at night. You keep an eye on it. You tweak what comes up. If it's using ChatGPT, it might be overly emotional and gushing at various points. So you might want to keep an eye on that. But in principle, I think it could work quite well.
Yeah, there's a few research projects that are coming out showing that people are actually responding better to when conversations are moderated by a chatbot. There's an energy provider here, Octopus Energy, that's switched a lot of its support from people to effectively GPT-powered support, and their satisfaction went from kind of like mid-60s to high 80s in terms of problem resolution on the thing. So I think there are maybe I don't know, but there are definitely applications for this sort of thing. Any other questions for our panel? No,
my question is...
So the question was, how do you like achieve penetration and basic engagement within the community? Is that right? So ultimately, like, the conversation engagement is a form of trust. Like, and the more trust that you have, the more open and engaged that conversation is going to be. To Aseem's point, you're better off doing something, getting something out there and starting to build that trust, starting to build that two-way conversation than trying to get it perfect and maybe waiting a little bit longer. So ultimately, I think it's all about relationship building. And if you can build that relationship, they can believe in you and you can believe in them, then I think that leads to open conversations. I'd be interested to see what the hypothesis around the resolution of ChatGPT was for Octopus Energy? For Octopus Energy, I hypothesized that ChatGPT takes the emotion out of it and just answers their question rather than being concerned that they seem quite angry. But yeah, I think it's all about understanding that they are people and building a relationship. And if you do that consistently and for long enough, you will see the penetration.
What do you think, Sean? Do you find it's sort of easy to build trust and get honest feedback from your participants?
Yeah, just transparency all the way. There's no need to try and cover up or anything. We try to be as transparent as possible, really obvious with our intentions. So if we're running a survey, nice little intro of, hey, this is for this part of the site. The reason why we're doing this is X. To really try and make sure we get that natural sort of response. Plus, they are estate agents, and naturally, sales-related people are so talkative and so natural, and it's not hard to ask for their honest opinion on things, and they're very rare to hold back. So we're fortunate in that demographic.